Great. So for the benefit of anyone joining our Lunch and Learn for the first time, these weekly sessions were developed as part of Haven Horizons virtual community of practice, which brings together academics, frontline professionals and others in the field of domestic, sexual and gender-based abuse. Our community of practice promotes collaborations and the sharing of knowledge and resources. Members and non-members are welcome to attend the weekly Lunch and Learn sessions on Teams, and the link is posted regularly to our social media pages as well as within the community of practice. And you can share this link with any of your colleagues who may be interested in participating. If you're interested in becoming a member of our community of practice, you can contact me at training@havenhorizons.com. And recording from the Lunch and Learn sessions will also be available on our YouTube channel and in the Lunch and Learn section of our virtual community of practice. So feel free to comment on any of the sessions and share your thoughts. You can also keep up to date by visiting Haven Horizons website at www.havenhorizons.com. So today we're delighted to welcome Professor Maeve Eogan. And Professor Maeve Eogan is an obstetrician and gynaecologist at the Rotunda Hospital in Dublin. She's an associate professor in UCD and the Royal College of Surgeons Ireland, and is the national clinical lead for the Irish Sexual Assault Treatment Units, or SATU. The Irish SATU network consists of 6 sexual assault treatment units, providing free clinical, forensic and supportive care for anyone of any gender aged 14 years and above who discloses sexual violence. Further information on the services and relevant clinical guidelines is available at either of the websites shown on the screen. Maeve's special interests are the promotion and management of health during pregnancy and postnatal, the provision of care to those who have experienced sexual violence, inclusion health, and the optimisation of access to responsive healthcare. She has undertaken several research projects in these contexts and has published and presented widely. Maeve will now share some insight into the work carried out in SATU.
So thank you very much, Sharon, and the community for inviting me to present today. We could actually just condense this down to kind of one sentence, which is, if you have a question about an SATU and care in an SATU, look up hse.ie/SATU and contact your nearest SATU and they'll give you advice. That's really the take-home message, because sometimes scenarios that you encounter may be quite nuanced or complex or a little bit difficult, and you don't really know what to do, and it hasn't been covered by what we've addressed today. So there's always somebody at the end of the phone. And the other thing is, if it's somebody that needs advice or support and is wondering what to do with something that's happened them, don't forget 1-800-778888, which is the 24-hour rape crisis phone line. And again, they can be a source of support and also advice and signposting. So I suppose how this evolved was, I know some of you, I believe, had asked questions about patient taking of DNA after an incident of sexual violence, for them to store themselves, as had been advocated in certain UK universities. Simple answer to that is the Faculty of Forensic Legal Medicine and the Forensic Science Ireland here, so Faculty of Forensic Legal Medicine in the UK and Forensic Science Ireland here, have really said they cannot stand over any evidence taken in that context. So recommending that to a patient isn't actually serving them any great purpose. But as you will see from my presentation, there are routes for people to access care, store evidence, and they don't just kind of enter a conveyor belt that they can't get off if they come to an SATU. There are very many patient-centred options for them to choose from. So we'll address those. And I don't have that many slides, so we should have plenty of time for questions at the end if people have them. I've no relevant disclosures. It is also important to mention that sexual violence is really common. It's really common in every country, and culture and community. Therefore, there are very likely people on this call who have themselves or somebody close to them experience sexual violence. And I do really acknowledge that this may bring up some uncomfortable memories, thoughts, or feelings about something that has happened. So there is support that exists. Any of you, as I say, anyone can contact the HSE or the RCC phone line 1-800 778 8888. But also any of you that are HSE staff can contact the Employee Assistance Programme, and I'm sure other areas that you're in, if you're not in the HSE, also have a similar thing. And it is really important that we exercise self-compassion so that we can support those who need us. And if anyone just wants to log off, that's absolutely fine as well. In terms of supporting material, if you're not familiar with the work of the SATU and the HSE SATU network, there is a lot of information available online. As I say, hse.ie/SATU. Our interagency guidelines, there's a link to them, and they're also through the resources for healthcare practitioners section of the SATU website, which is available to all. Recently, Cuan, you may have seen these ads on radio, TV, social media, advertising alwayshere.ie. Cuan are the statutory agency funded through the Department of Justice, which aim to bring all the supports for people who've experienced domestic, sexual and gender-based violence together. So that website has a lot of resources about statutory and non-statutory agencies that exist. So there's a lot of information. It's just about knowing where to go for it. So as I said, sexual violence is really common. In terms of contemporary Irish data, some of you may have heard of the Sexual Violence Survey, which was conducted by the Central Statistics Office back in 2022. This was a survey of a representative sample of 4,500 people living in Ireland. And unfortunately, this identified that 52% of women and 28% of men had experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. That included a range of non-consensual contact and non-contact sexual violence, but even what people would consider sort of the most extreme form of that, 13% of women and 3% of men disclosed experiencing penetrative rape. So it is a really, unfortunately, common scenario for people to encounter in this country. 1 in 5 of those between the ages of 18 and 24, which of course should be some of the best years of our lives, 1 in 5 of these experienced sexual violence as an adult and a child. And even when they asked people over the age of 65, almost 1 in 10 of those aged over 65 had experienced sexual violence as an adult and a child. Consequently, no matter if you're looking after people and you're linking with people, no matter what age those people are, there is a prevalence of sexual violence in their history. And I think it's really important that we all remember that. And the reason why it's good to be aware of that is that if we can provide care and treatment promptly, we may reduce the short and long-term physical and emotional consequences of sexual violence. And equally, if somebody does want to report to An Garda Síochána and pursue a criminal investigation, the quicker we report and the quicker we do that, the better in terms of them accessing the appropriate supports and also evidence. However, there is no statute of limitations on sexual crime. So just because something happened somebody 3 weeks, 3 years, 3 decades ago, doesn't mean that they can't report that to An Garda Síochána. Obviously, the opportunity for DNA evidence or CCTV evidence or some corroborative witness statements may have passed, but it doesn't mean it can't be reported. But equally, the reason it's important for us to know about the prevalence is that we need to heighten the awareness of that prevalence. For example, as I said, if you look at rape, and within the sexual violence survey, 13% of women and 3% of men had experienced that. If there were other health issues that were experienced by 13% of women and 3% of men, there'd be ads on the back of buses about making sure that you check this or check that or go for this test or that test. So this is something we know is there, and we need to raise awareness of that prevalence. As staff, in the health services, we need to be aware of it, because obviously some of the interventions or screening tests or recommendations that we provide to somebody may actually be a trigger about something that happened them previously. And there is no part of the country or the culture, there's no community in this country that is immune from sexual violence. So none of us can say, oh, that won't cross our paths, either personally or as people that we meet in the context of our work. So where may disclosures of sexual violence come? Basically, they can come anywhere. In terms of the workplace, you know, as I say, I'm coming through this through working in a healthcare environment, because as well as working in sexual assault unit, I'm an obstetrician and gynaecologist in the Rotunda Hospital. So in terms of providing pregnancy or gynae care, somebody may disclose this. If you're a midwife providing prenatal education and you're talking about birth, and you may be talking about the very real realities of discomfort during birth, recommendations for pain relief, options and supports available for mode of birth, you may find somebody breaks down and makes a disclosure of something that happened them previously, which is really adding to their anxiety around birth. You may be a teacher and you may be talking in the context of those you're educating about something allied to sexual violence, or indeed something allied to some area of scientific education. And a pupil in your class may come to you and disclose something that's happened. You may be admitting somebody for a procedure under general anaesthetic. It may be nothing to do with like intimate examination, yet the patient may raise a concern about the fact that she'll be asleep, she won't know what's happening her and what might happen her in that context because of something that happened previously. So it's really important that no matter where we work, or what area of healthcare or society we work in, we may individually receive disclosures, and it's really good to be able to support people to access the care that they need. So in terms of the sexual assault unit, there are 6 of these around the country, as well as a smaller out of hours service available in Limerick. So the Limerick service, if any of you are working in the Limerick area, doesn't provide exactly the same suite of care options that are provided by the SATU. They don't have somebody on the phone all the time or available all the time. If you are in the Limerick area, you may be better to phone one of the other units if you're looking for advice. So the units that exist are in Dublin, Mullingar, Galway, Donegal, Cork and Waterford. These units are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And they provide a combination of medical and forensic care appropriate to what the person needs, and also psychological support through the allied rape crisis, which frequently in the sexual assault units is an in-person attendance by a volunteer from the local rape crisis. But in certain units, they don't have in-person attendance, but they link the person with the adjacent or close by rape crisis centre. There are 3 pathways under which people will come to the sexual assault unit. The most common there on the slide is number 1. About 2 out of every 3 people who come to the sexual assault unit come following making a disclosure of sexual violence to An Garda Síochána. And they attend for a forensic examination where we take DNA and toxicology samples as relevant. They receive a health check to make sure they haven't sustained any injuries at the time, and they're offered appropriate medication. So that might be emergency contraception, it might be preventative medicines for HIV. Everybody is also offered to commence a hepatitis B immunisation programme if they haven't had hepatitis B vaccination previously, more as a sort of a health promotion thing rather than something directly relevant to sexual assault units. The second group of people are people who've experienced sexual violence and they absolutely don't want to report to An Garda Síochána, or perhaps they're a long time since the incident and they may have reported to An Garda Síochána, but they just want to come to the SATU for a health check. And they want to just make sure that they haven't suffered any physical consequences of the sexual violence. And they may also want to commence, for example, the hepatitis B vaccination programme. They may want an STI screen. We give them whatever they want in terms of their own particular history. And then option 3 is a kind of a kind of a midway point. So there are people who don't want to draw the line under reporting to An Garda Síochána. So they may want to report to An Garda Síochána in time. They understand that DNA evidence can really only be collected for the first 7 days after an incident, and certainly as soon as possible is of benefit. So they come to us. We give them all the health elements and the psychological support, but in addition, we take the relevant toxicology and DNA samples and we store them in a freezer in the SATU for up to a year after the incident. And that gives them the opportunity to report to An Garda Síochána in time, but have that what may be critical or crucial DNA evidence available, so the guards can use that as part of their investigation. Of the people who come to us through the option 3 route, where they're storing evidence with us, about 1 in 5 go on to report to An Garda Síochána. So it's certainly a valuable route for people, and people find it beneficial. In 2024, over 1,000 people attended the sexual assault units for care. Half of them had reported to An Garda Síochána. 13% stored evidence, as I say, to keep options open. 91% of those, so really 9 out of 10 of those attending sexual assault treatment units are women, and they're women assaulted by men. But obviously, that is not an entirely gendered service. We meet people, we meet men who've been assaulted, we meet people who've been assaulted by women. So it is important to that we don't, and I suppose this is particularly important for those of us in the Rotunda, because the Rotunda can be often perceived as a women's hospital, but the service that we offer in the sexual assault unit is open to people of all genders and gender identities. About 1 in 2 of those attending the sexual assault unit are under the age of 25 years. So it is important to realise that we need to start talking about this early in people's life. You know, there's no point in just having discussions around sexual violence when people go to university or go to higher education. Really important that we start these discussions in primary school and secondary school at sort of age appropriate levels. You can see we started collecting national data for our 6 units in 2009. The numbers attending have more than doubled, and mostly they're increasing year on year. You can see, not unexpectedly, 2020, the time when we were all told to stay at home and stay safe, the numbers attending the sexual assault units did reduce, but they by no means disappeared, and sexual violence remained an issue during those COVID times. So it is really important that we realise that cracking this nut is way more complex than just stay at home and don't go out and don't socialize and don't walk down at dark alleys. Often, as Rape Crisis did a kind of public awareness campaign at one stage, and they said it's not the monster on the street that matters, it's the monster in your bed. So sometimes the home is not necessarily a safe environment, and I suppose nobody knows that more than many of you working in the areas that you work in. It is also important to acknowledge that society isn't necessarily the most kind place for people who've experienced sexual violence. And that's, I suppose, why disclosure of sexual violence can be really difficult for people. This work was really interesting. Dublin Rape Crisis did a behaviour and attitude survey, which was undertaken by Ipsos and presented just before the summer. And it was very interesting. First of all, under half of women felt safe from sexual violence, while 8 out of 10 men felt safe. Equally, disclosure for victims is difficult, with many people presuming that if someone's experienced sexual violence, they'll find it too traumatic or personal to share, and they'll prefer to sort of forget about it and move on. So maybe as a society, we're not necessarily totally welcoming to helping people disclose. And I thought this was really concerning. And you hear this in the context, certainly over the last number of years, there has been a number of quite high profile sexual violence cases that have gone through the courts, and certainly I think we all heard quite a lot of victim blaming in the context of one in particular of those cases, and for sure this behaviour and attitude survey identified that 20% believe that false allegations of sexual violence are common. 11% think that someone should not be believed unless there's a guilty verdict in court. But certainly in the past year, we've certainly heard scenarios where even in the context of guilty verdicts, people were still questioning the complainant in terms of what they may have done to make themselves vulnerable. And 12% think that if someone doesn't report an incident to the guards, they shouldn't be believed. So we have a lot to do in terms of societal, making our society supportive of people who've experienced sexual violence. And these type of events like today are important just for us to kind of come to terms with those kind of cruel truths and ensure that we do whatever we can to optimize things. This is a video that's available on the HSE website, and it just summarises the different care options within the SATU, which I have addressed, but it might just stick with you. Sometimes a picture tells 1,000 words. Sorry. And just to say, in terms of age ranges, since that video was made, we've brought back the age limit for storage of evidence to 16. So people over the age of 16 can access that. The youngest age for attending the sexual assault unit is 14, although there are services within paediatrics, so in the Dublin area, that's TALA. But that comes under a different governance. So yeah, people over 16 can can access storage of evidence, and people over 16 can access healthcare. If you are attending for forensic examination, so you've reported to An Garda Síochána, the guards will not bring somebody to an SATU without somebody over 18 either present in person to provide that consent, or indeed available just to provide that consent remotely. So, and obviously Children First also means there are limitations on the extent of the confidentiality we can offer for people under the age of 18. But in simple terms, the SATUs look after people over the age of 14 and over, with certain consent issues between 14 and 18. So the other thing about sexual assault care is that physical injury is not an inevitable consequence of sexual violence. So sometimes people will phone us and they'll say, I think this thing happened to me last night, but I'm not bleeding. I don't have any soreness down below. Maybe it's not sexual violence. So it's not that somebody has to have injury in order for sexual violence to be conclusively confirmed in a court of law, if we want to use that as the sort of as the ultimate diagnosis of something happening, as would have been suggested by that behaviour and attitude survey. But equally, in terms of accessing SATU care, all the sort of inclusion criteria are just that somebody thinks there's been unwanted sexual activity, or knows for certain there's been unwanted sexual activity. Medical care and psychological support is provided for all care options. Preventative treatment for infectious diseases is provided if needed, as I say, commonly offering a hepatitis B vaccination programme or providing post-exposure prophylaxis for HIV, which about 10% of our attendees would need. And reassuringly, when we see people for follow-up, we have a very low rate of sexually transmitted infections diagnosed after the initial attendance. So that's positive in terms of the preventative treatment being effective. Over the last number of years, we've done a range of different research projects looking at those who attend the SATU and gaining information and metrics totally anonymized in terms of informing, I suppose, mitigation strategies and also informing what we need to do in terms of service development. So, for example, what we found in female attendees, 92% of the assailants were male. 7% unfortunately experienced multiple assailant assault, and injury was more likely in those over the age of 18 years, people who attended soon after an incident, and people who reported to An Garda Síochána. So that the kind of association with reporting to An Garda Síochána is sometimes, I suppose, people feel they have more validity in reporting if they have an injury. And that's, I suppose, what society has kind of taught us. Well, if there's no injury there, surely it couldn't have been sexual violence. So you can see even among those coming to us, that sort of myth is perpetuated as such. In terms of male incidents, so incidents of men attending the sexual assault unit, the numbers attending have increased by 24% over the last sort of 7 years. So that is a positive, I suppose. That word is getting out there. And 3 out of 5 had reported to An Garda Síochána. Commonly, the assailant in a male incident is a man. And a higher proportion of male survivors were assaulted in the assailant's home. So went somewhere where there was then a breakdown in trust and something happening. Male survivors were less likely to disclose alcohol use. And I suppose that's really important to notice, because it kind of does debunk some of the victim blaming myths that are perpetuated. The same among our adolescents. Up at the top of the screen, we compared adolescent attendances to adult female attendances. And actually, adolescents were less likely to have taken alcohol. And I suppose, again, people will throw out comments about how, oh, well, if those young girls just would drink less, it would all be fine. And we actually found that alcohol was less likely to be associated. So, I think that's why research is really good in terms of informing what actually happens, so that any kind of discussions around it can be informed. So just to finish, and there's plenty of time, as I say, for questions. As I say, sexual violence is common. Many interactions can lead to disclosure. We need to be supportive. I wouldn't be recommending that colleges would be providing kits for DNA evidence. It's far better if somebody can be supported to attend a sexual assault unit. As I say, they won't be pushed onto a conveyor belt that they can't get off. It's very much according to the pace and type of examination and care that they want. We have to be accessible and responsive to people's needs, but equally it's important that we tell the truth and really highlight to them that taking their own samples won't necessarily be of any benefit to them in the future. And indeed, it may be very harmful when they realise that these samples aren't going to be useful. Other sort of things that I wanted to tell you about is we're currently running a fundraiser for the sexual assault unit in the Rotunda Hospital. If you even want to donate €1 or 2, we've been given an expanded footprint and we currently don't have a budget for optimising that, decorating rooms, developing a second forensic suite, etc. So if any of you want to contribute to our fundraiser, we'd greatly appreciate it. But it's by no means expected, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that any of you may have.